While Washington fixates on nuclear arsenals and battlefield maps, Vladimir Putin has already deployed the most devastating weapon in modern geopolitical warfare, and most Americans have no idea it even exists. We're not talking about hypersonic missiles or tactical nukes. We're talking about something far more insidious, something that operates in the shadows of global finance and energy markets, something that's methodically dismantling American economic hegemony while Trump shakes hands and makes deals. Right now, as you're watching this, Putin is engineering a systematic restructuring of the international order that will leave the United States economically isolated, strategically outmaneuvered, and fundamentally weakened for generations. The game being played here isn't the one you see on CNN. It's deeper, more sophisticated, and infinitely more dangerous. Let's cut through the noise and talk about what's actually happening. Putin isn't trying to destroy America with bombs. That's amateur hour. That's for countries without chess players. He's doing something far more elegant and far more permanent. He's building a parallel global economic system that bypasses American power entirely, and he's using our own greed and short-sightedness as the fuel. Right now, Russia operates what intelligence analysts call the shadow fleet. 978 tankers, representing 18.5% of the global oil tanker fleet, moving 127 million deadweight tons of sanctioned oil to buyers across the planet. These aren't just ships. They're floating middle fingers to American sanctions policy, and they're generating roughly $155 billion annually for Moscow, despite every sanction we've thrown at them. The United States imposed sanctions on Gazprom Neft and Surgutneftegas in January, sanctioned 183 vessels, went after insurance companies, targeted oil traders, and you know what happened? Russian oil revenues dropped slightly, then stabilized. The shadow fleet just keeps growing. In November alone, 65% of Russian crude was carried by sanctioned shadow tankers, and they're still delivering. The EU banned refined products from Russian crude starting January 21, 2026, and Russia's response was basically to laugh and redirect flows to West Africa while Chinese and Indian refineries kept buying. This isn't sanctions evasion. This is sanctions irrelevance. Putin has constructed an entire maritime ecosystem that operates outside Western financial infrastructure, using flags of convenience from Panama, Liberia, Gabon, the Cook Islands, vessels registered under shell companies in the UAE, insurance from entities that Western regulators can't touch, and a network of opaque traders willing to move oil through jurisdictions where nobody asks questions. And here's the kicker. This system is now so robust that analysts estimate even if enforcement tightened dramatically, Russian oil could still fetch $65 per barrel on average, well above the pathetic $60 price cap the G7 thought would cripple Moscow. The shadow fleet generated an extra $9.4 billion in additional revenue in 2024 alone by circumventing the price cap. That's $9.4 billion that went directly into funding the war in Ukraine, into developing nuclear-powered weapon systems, into buying influence across the global south, into everything Americans think sanctions are supposed to prevent. Meanwhile, Trump's negotiators are shuttling between Moscow and Kyiv, talking about land deals and spheres of influence, while Putin sits back and watches his economic war machine hum along perfectly. But the shadow fleet is just the visible manifestation of something much larger and more terrifying. Putin isn't just evading sanctions, he's pioneering a post-American financial architecture that other sanctioned states are now replicating. Iran has 170 vessels with 34.2 million deadweight tons in their own shadow fleet. Venezuela, before Trump's theatrical seizure of Maduro, was operating the same playbook. North Korea has been doing this for decades. What Putin has done is professionalize it, systematize it, and demonstrate to every country on earth that American economic coercion is fundamentally toothless if you're willing to invest in the infrastructure to bypass it. And that infrastructure isn't theoretical. It exists right now, it's expanding, and it's becoming the template for a new model of international trade that doesn't require dollars, doesn't require SWIFT, doesn't require Western insurance or shipping or banking. Russia's success has created a blueprint, and Beijing is watching very carefully. China's already building its own parallel systems. The Belt and Road Initiative, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, CIPS payment system as an alternative to SWIFT, yuan-denominated oil contracts. When people talk about de-dollarization, this is what they mean. Not some abstract economic theory, but actual physical infrastructure, ships, insurance companies, trading platforms, payment systems that allows major economies to conduct massive volumes of trade completely outside American oversight. The Shadow Fleet isn't just about Russian oil. It's proof of concept that the entire sanctions-based enforcement mechanism that has underpinned American global power since World War II can be systematically dismantled by any sufficiently motivated state actor. And once that infrastructure exists, once those pathways are established, they don't go away. They become permanent features of the global economy. Other countries, watching Russia successfully move $155 billion worth of oil annually despite comprehensive Western sanctions, are learning a very dangerous lesson. American economic power is conditional, limited, and increasingly obsolete. That's the real threat. Not that Russia sells some oil, but that Putin has demonstrated the entire enforcement architecture of American hegemony is built on assumptions that no longer hold. And while all this plays out in shipping lanes and financial dark markets, Putin is simultaneously executing the geopolitical component of his strategy with surgical precision. Trump thinks he's negotiating a grand bargain. America gets Venezuela and the Western Hemisphere, Russia gets Ukraine and its near abroad, China gets East Asia, everybody stays in their lane and we avoid World War III. It sounds reasonable until you realize Putin has no intention of honoring any such agreement, and more importantly, he doesn't need to. Look at what's actually happened over the past month. Trump invaded Venezuela, seized Maduro, announced America would run the country, and Putin's response was silence. Not a single statement from the Kremlin. Foreign Minister Lavrov made some perfunctory comments about international law, but Putin personally said nothing. Why? Because Venezuela was never strategically important to Russia. It was a liability, a money pit that owed Rosneft $2 billion and provided minimal return. Putin let Trump have his theatrical victory in Latin America because it costs him nothing and gains him everything. Every day Trump spends focused on Venezuela, on Greenland, on NATO cost-sharing, on his spheres of influence fantasy, is a day Putin consolidates his actual objectives in Ukraine. The trilateral peace talks in Abu Dhabi that just wrapped up? Russia's position hasn't moved an inch. Putin's foreign policy advisor called the Kremlin meetings with Trump's envoys constructive and trusting, but the substance was clear. Russia wants complete control of Donbass, Ukraine must withdraw from territories Russia claims, and until those demands are met, the war continues. Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff says they're down to one issue: land deals. But that's the entire issue. That's the war. Russia isn't making concessions. Russia is waiting for Ukraine to collapse under pressure from a war-weary West and an impatient American president who thinks deals are about splitting differences rather than recognizing power realities. Putin has explicitly stated that Russia's interest in Ukrainian withdrawal from occupied territories is reduced to zero, given battlefield momentum, and he'll achieve objectives by military means if necessary. That's not negotiation. That's a conquest strategy with a diplomatic paint job. And while Trump imagines himself as the great dealmaker bringing peace to Europe, Putin is methodically destroying Ukraine's energy infrastructure, advancing on multiple fronts, and building the nuclear-powered weapon systems that will define the next generation of strategic competition. The Burevestnik nuclear-powered cruise missile, which allegedly flew 8,700 miles in 15 hours during October tests, and the Poseidon nuclear-powered underwater drone aren't just weapons. They're statements. They're Putin telling the world that Russia has developed delivery systems that can evade any missile defense America might build, including Trump's proposed Golden Dome. These aren't incremental improvements to existing arsenals. These are game-changers designed specifically to nullify American strategic advantages. The Poseidon, a 65-foot nuclear-powered torpedo with intercontinental range capable of generating radioactive tsunamis and carrying a 2-megaton warhead, is designed to strike carrier groups and coastal cities with essentially zero warning and zero interception capability. NATO's own classified intelligence assessment admits they lack anti-submarine torpedoes with the necessary speed and range to combat it. And the timing? Putin awarded state honors to the developers of these weapons in November, right as Trump was trying to arrange peace talks. That's not coincidence. That's Putin demonstrating that while America negotiates, Russia innovates. While Trump cuts deals, Putin builds weapons that make those deals irrelevant. The New START Treaty, the last remaining arms control agreement between the US and Russia, expired February 5, 2026. There is now zero legally binding constraint on Russian or American nuclear arsenals for the first time in decades, and Putin has made clear Russia won't return to negotiations unless it extracts massive concessions from Washington. Trump's response? Ordering the resumption of nuclear testing, which plays directly into Putin's narrative and legitimizes Russia's own weapons development. The whole situation is a masterclass in strategic manipulation. Trump thinks he's strong-arming Putin into a deal. Putin is actually strong-arming the entire international order into accepting a world where Russian military technology is on par with or superior to American systems, where Russian economic infrastructure operates independent of Western control, and where American sanctions are. Performative theater rather than meaningful policy instruments. That's what's being constructed here. Not peace in Ukraine, but the architecture of American decline. The real genius of Putin's strategy is that he's turned American institutional weaknesses into Russian advantages without firing a shot at the homeland. Trump's obsession with bilateral deals and transactional diplomacy, his fundamental belief that international relations are real estate negotiations writ large, plays perfectly into Moscow's hands. Putin has studied American politics for 2 decades. He knows that U.S. foreign policy is reactive, personality-driven, subject to electoral cycles and media narratives. He knows that American attention spans are measured in news cycles, not strategic timelines. He knows that if you can survive the initial sanctions push, if you can weather the first wave of international outrage, if you can build alternative systems before Western enforcement mechanisms adapt, you win. Because Western political systems can't maintain focus. Administrations change, priorities shift, Ukraine fatigue sets in, and suddenly the coalition fractures. Europe is already showing cracks, Germany's chancellor warning that the 2 major threats are Putin's Russia and Trump's America tells you everything about where this is heading. NATO unity, which was supposed to be the bulwark against Russian aggression, is dissolving under the weight of Trump's Greenland demands and his open contempt for alliance commitments. Poland's president is warning that regardless of whether a peace deal is signed, Russia will regroup and attack Europe within years. Finland is fortifying its border and preparing for Russian aggression that it knows is coming. The Baltic states are terrified, and Trump's response is to demand they spend more on defense while simultaneously suggesting he might trade their security for concessions elsewhere. Putin doesn't need to invade NATO territory. He just needs to wait for the alliance to tear itself apart from internal contradictions, and Trump is doing that work for him. The Venezuela precedent, Trump claiming the right to invade countries and remove leaders based on nebulous security threats, has destroyed any remaining moral authority America had to oppose Russian actions in its near abroad. As analysts have pointed out, if the United States asserts the right to use military force to capture foreign leaders, it accuses of crimes. What prevents China from doing the same in Taiwan or Russia in Ukraine? Trump has legitimized exactly the kind of sphere of influence politics that will enable Putin to subjugate Eastern Europe, and he's done it while thinking he's being tough. Meanwhile, Russian oil revenues continue flowing, the shadow fleet continues expanding, weapons development continues accelerating, and the geopolitical architecture Putin is building, one where great powers carve up regions, where international law is optional, where economic sanctions are irrelevant, becomes more entrenched every single day. By the time American policymakers realize what's happened, by the time they understand that they've been outplayed not in a single negotiation but across the entire strategic landscape, it will be too late. The systems will be in place. The precedents will be set. The alternatives to dollar hegemony will be operational. And America will wake up in a world where its primary instruments of global influence, economic coercion through sanctions, alliance networks through NATO, financial dominance through dollar-denominated trade, are all fundamentally compromised. That's not a scenario. That's the trajectory we're on right now, today. While Trump tweets about Greenland and imagines himself making history, Putin isn't trying to destroy America. He's making America irrelevant. And he's doing it so methodically, so patiently, with such strategic sophistication that most Americans won't understand what happened until it's already over. That's the game. That's what's at stake. And that's why Putin is winning.